Chapter 1651 Rare Bloodlines. Once the storm dragon hatched, the others were not far behind. Before the tiny blue dragon could finish the first plate of fish, another egg cracked, and a magnificent white and silver dragon, with large leathery wings, burst free from its confinement and roared in annoyance at the lingering shell pieces on its body, as if that would make them move. And to Carl's surprise, it did. The little one was a wind element dragon of a species Carl did not recognize, and his breath contained the fundamental rule of wind right from birth. All he had to do was will it, and the wind would blow hard enough to scrub his soft scales clean. The matriarch picked him up out of the nest before his antics could disturb the others and placed him on the table of dragon food so that he could pick. "Little one, I will be caring for you and this clutch. Choose your first meal, and we will record it as your favorite," she explained. The wind dragon frowned, his brow scrunched in concentration. He was newly born, but they already had such difficult tasks for him. He would not let this strange red dragon defeat him in a game of logic. With a proud screech, he spread his wings, intending to claim the whole table, only to realize that at his size, he could barely cover one plate. So, he improvised. He grabbed a few pieces of everything that smelled good and tossed them into a pile, then protectively guarded it. Noted. The wind dragon is a foodie. Matron Aaliyah noted. Carl watched the confusion as more eggs began to hatch, and then looked off into the distance, where they could see more of the clutches starting to become active. "Should we get back in flight so that we can watch more of the hatchings?" he asked as Dana smiled down at the shaking nest. "No, let's wait here. We can watch the others at a distance. The only one that we can't see from here is the forest nest, and that one's got both Lotus and Button at it, so the hatchlings are definitely not going to be left to fend for themselves." Dana joked. "True, and Nyan is over there with Thor, Tessa, and the Grassland group. I wonder where Naksha went," Carl asked. He could search for her in the tiny world, but with so much activity, that would be more annoyance than simply guessing. "She's inside the mountain. There are some shadow and earth element dragon eggs that responded better to being underground than in the woods or in the grass. So we put them there to grow. The patriarch should be with them as well, as that group is near the actual orphanage and academy compound that we have been renovating in preparation for an influx of students. It's nearly perfect now, and we've had the Darklight host bring us a load of study materials from the church lately," Librarian Ike explained. "That is wonderful news. As long as you've got everything that they will need for a standard education, it will be fine. The last thing that we're going to need is already in place. We just need to keep them in the space." "Berserker? He isn't going to want to leave," Ike replied. Carl laughed. "No, not him. I meant Nyan and the two regress dragons. They can be our representatives from the immortal worlds to cover the topics that the instructors from home don't know. Some of these dragons are going to be born very powerful, and if we don't have the right training in place, it will stunt their growth. If that happens, I will have to transfer them out for the new home clan to raise, so that they move smoothly to immortality. I know that at least a few of the more powerful ones are going to have that level of potential, but this is still a pocket dimension, and the fundamental rules here are not complete. Everything that I have learned, plus the beasts, is accessible. They're all bonded to me, so their fundamental rules are at least partially accessible by me. However, that doesn't even come close to touching on everything that the dragons might need to grow into immortality. However, I don't know what to do to make it possible for them to learn others, or if they can do it anyhow, and the rules simply aren't embedded into the nature of the space. That's something that wasn't made clear to me. I know that while they're here, the other immortals don't seem to have their power suppressed, though. So it might just be a matter of understanding. Those with rules other than what I understand might be able to grow, but simply won't see a bonus to their growth rate from the tiny world. Or their growth in this space might actually improve it as they learn more. I really do need to get to the library." Ike laughed. "See, eventually, everyone learns the wisdom of the blue dragons. There can never be enough knowledge. Raising the children is a long process. You can obtain the knowledge that you need as we go. There has to be a reason that the practice was both started and stopped. Immortals rarely forget, so it must have fallen out of favor for some reason. Nonetheless, Now that you do have your own pocket dimension, it's imperative that you learn all you can about growing and fortifying it. Alright, I will head there after the eggs have hatched. It looks like we've got a rather interesting young one coming out now. Carl agreed. Librarian Ike turned to see what Carl was talking about, and found that there was a plain white dragon stepping delicately from an egg. Originally, there hadn't been any chromatic dragons among the clutches, but that aura was certainly that of the white dragon, god of healing. The tiny dragon gave the world a curious glance, then flew over to Ike. You're blue. Blue dragons know things. Where is the best food? Chapter 1652. Hatchlings Need to Know. The librarian laughed at the formality of the tiny white dragon. In personality, it was a lot like the other one that had come here, the regressed dragon, known as Brother Chin. They were both overly formal and rigid, only this one was doing it instinctively, and the other had practiced it for a lifetime. If you have a way to contact them, you should let the other white dragon know that there is one of his kin here. We didn't expect that, but having another white dragon here should help the little one adjust more easily than simply leaving him with the orphanage. White is one of the few types of dragons that we don't have here, as far as the chromatic dragon gods. Carl nodded and opened a small portal to grab the little dragon from where he was watching the lakefront group hatching. While I appreciate that you are comfortable, the evolution of the eggs has granted you a brother of the same species. Librarian Ike believes that it would be best if you helped the little one get situated. Carl explained. A white dragon hatchling here? Brother Chin asked, confused. Then the hatchling turned to look at him and gave a curious snort. You brought another hatchling to teach me how to be a hatchling? Interesting strategy. We will see if it pays off. Brother Chin laughed. Oh, this one is going to be a handful, I can tell already. Fine, I will help guide him. The faithful descendants of the gods often have strong personalities descended from their divine lineage. Of course we do. We are divine. The hatchling snorted. Behind him at the nest, a deep blue dragon crackling with lightning laughed. If you're divine, then what am I? The newly hatched divine lightning dragon laughed. Not only was she more powerful than the little white dragon, she was also prettier, and her powers had manifested at birth. How could that little white lizard compare to Her Majesty? She flapped her wings to land on the buffet table and picked out a fine collection of meats, then used her lightning to roast the first bit with a sense of smug superiority. Meat was so much better when it was cooked. How could she eat like some savage, just gulping down raw fish? Hey! That fish-eating savage storm dragon was trying to steal her meat now. Thwop! With a flick of her wing, the other hatchling went flying off the table, then grumbled and flew back up. If you didn't want to share, you could just say so. He complained. The divine lightning dragon relented, while the elf working the table laughed silently at their antics. The hatchling cooked a bit of fish for her peer, and the storm dragon bit into it tentatively. This is so much better than cold. The texture isn't as wiggly, though. How do we make it wiggly and warm? The chef laughed at his confusion. That, my young friend, is the art of cooking. Here, try this bit of meat. It's called a medium-rare steak, and it is both wiggly and warm, which is hard to accomplish with fish. The storm dragon bit into the meat, then waved its head, letting the meat wiggle as it dangled from his mouth. The divine lightning dragon stared at him in thinly veiled disgust, but had cooked her red meat exactly the same way. It was the best way to eat it. But still, he ate like a pig, not a dragon. More of the eggs were hatching now, multiples at a time, and the hatchlings were scrambling to get to the table for the meat. This is insane. Not even in a single clutch do the eggs often hatch on the same day, but here we've got eggs from a dozen different clutches and even different species, all hatching minutes apart. Is there something about this place that I don't know? Librarian Ike asked as he watched the spectacle. Possibly. I did use some abilities to optimize both plant and animal growth, which might have synchronized their growth rates. That wasn't the intended purpose, but if they were all pushed to their maximum potential, it makes sense that they would all hatch close together, when they were all affected at the same time. Carl offered. I will look into it later. So many baby dragons. The librarian sighed, foreseeing headaches in his future. Carl watched in silent amusement as the hatchlings fought over food. even though there was more available than they could possibly finish in one day, much less one meal. Then, the sound of frustration from further down the mountain caught his attention, and a small black form rushed out bursting into the open sky, while an annoyed druid stood at the entrance to the caverns. The hatchling circled for a moment, then turned to fly toward Carl, or perhaps the table of food behind him. "Do we have different offerings at different stations?" Carl asked, watching the dragon fly their way.
"No.
It's all the same, just in different proportions, based on what they're most likely to want. The water dragon clutches have more fish." Librarian Ike explained. The little black dragon flew up in front of Carl, who held out his arm as a perch for it to land on.
"Hi.
"Why do you smell like home?" it asked. "I don't know the answer to that. Do I smell like death magic? Or do I smell like something else?" "Not death magic. That other black dragon will be here soon. I can sense her. But even from inside, I could pick out the scent, and I want to know what it is." Carl nodded. "Likely because I made this place. If this place is home, and I made it, then it makes sense that I smell like home." The black dragon thought hard about that answer, then decided that it didn't understand. "I will come back for the answer. I have to go before she catches me." "Good luck, little one. You've got about 10 seconds of freedom left." "Freedom?" Naksha laughed as she caught the tiny one in one massive claw, then transformed back into a humanoid to clutch him to her chest. "All right, you curious little escape artist. Time to go back to dinner with the others. You can come bother Uncle Carl later." "Bye, Uncle Carl." Dana laughed as Naksha took the little black dragon away. It looks like there will not be a dull moment in the tiny world. Chapter 1653. Free Spirit. Naksha sighed as the little dragon nearly wiggled out of her arms trying to wave goodbye and retreated into the mountain to take her charge down the stairs. The young ones were surprising everyone with the advanced bloodlines that they were showing. These were far stronger than what they had come from, which were mostly sub-dragons and lesser species. Like up on the ridge, the clutch in the mountain had produced a chromatic dragon whelp, as well as a handful of divine dragon species that were born to be immortals. All they needed was time to grow. It was as if they had actually been born on an immortal world, even though the tiny world lacked many of the aspects that a proper immortal world would have. Just the mana change appeared to be enough for them to have advanced, and to have maximized their growth to the same level that the clan compound would. Possibly higher, as the mana here was actually much more dense, as Carl had placed condensation runic arrays when it was still using mortal mana, and they had some effectiveness even with the limited amount of immortal world energy that he had introduced. The hybridization didn't hurt any of the life here, and the new plants that they were introducing in the last few hours, while Lotus and Remy waited for the eggs to hatch, was doing wonders for the regeneration of the immortal energy. Carl could feel the islands of power growing through the space, just as he could feel the enhancement of the beast's spaces as they were transitioned to the new flora. Soon, they would have a whole new power level within the tiny world, and the influx of baby dragons was going to do wonders for the balance of this space. With them constantly emitting higher quality energy, the rest of the residents would get a boost as well, and the space would begin to stabilize. It was perfect. While Carl was watching the hatchlings on the mountain, Lotus and Button were working together to entertain the hatchlings in the forest. They had 4 forest dragons so far, and Button was super excited to have juniors of her own species to boss around. Unfortunately for her, the hatchlings were not the sort to take orders any more than she was. Predictably, the moment that they had hatched, they had gone immediately for Lotus, who was pushing out the effects of, if not friend, why friend shaped at the highest possible level. With that spell in effect, the hatchlings were all over her, and Lotus was in heaven. Carl might not be allowed to have a baby dragon, but the black dragon didn't say anything at all about her. So, that meant that she was definitely allowed to have them all. The others in the hatching area thought that there might be something wrong with her logic, but they hadn't found the fault yet. Lotus got to play with baby dragons. She helped them get their first meal, taught them about the forest and where they were. Everything that you would want or need a newborn dragon to know in their first hour outside the shell. Plus, she never got tired of meeting new baby dragons. That level of green dragon cleric energy was exactly what they needed for a bunch of rambunctious nature element dragon hatchlings. Lyric laughed as Button and the hatchlings began making a tree fort in place of a nest, using nature magic to weave vines and grow branches into flat surfaces for them. The tiny world's resident forest dragon had prepared well for this day, and she had hundreds of blankets stored and ready to make the most epic cuddle pile that the tiny world had ever seen. That was her plan for the day. Young dragons needed a lot of sleep, so after they had played with Lotus and eaten, then took a short flight to get used to their wings, they could all nap in the tree fort. Of course, they had sized all the entrances for hatchlings and young dragons, so the only adult that wouldn't struggle to enter was Lotus, whose dragon form was no larger than Button's. Everyone else was going to have to reach through the small door and pull someone out at random, unless they were very slender and could get their upper body through the hole. There was a large balcony, though. They needed it, since the hatchlings weren't skilled enough to fly through the door and tuck their wings at the same time. They would just land outside and wobble in. Watching the little dragons smugly attempt to hide from the adults was making everyone work hard not to laugh at their ingenuity. Sure, they were out of sight of the adults, but now everyone knew where they were and whether any were missing. It also kept them all warm and dry until it was time for them to eat again in a few hours and out from underfoot while everyone else worked. Their plan worked so well that nobody was even upset with them. Especially not Lotus and Button, who were currently leading 2 separate exploration teams around the forest, so that the hatchlings knew where the important stuff was. Like the edge of the forest by the lake, where the breakfast was served. There would actually be food for them right here next to the tree fort. But Button was adamant that it was an important landmark of the space that everyone should learn on the first day. It was also her favorite spot to go swimming. Cara laughed as a small black dragon had peeked out of the entrance to the underground nesting area and made a finger over the lips hushing gesture to the black dragon who was attempting to sneak out for the second time in 2 hours. That child was going to be trouble, he could tell already. Not only was he a black dragon, attuned to death, which made others naturally uneasy, but he was also a born escape artist. Giggling from the doorway was followed by the frantic flapping of wings, then a strangled squawk as Naksha caught her wayward charge. "Where do you think that you're going? It's time for you to eat, little one," she demanded. "There is food here too. I will be free, I tell you." Then the little dragon curled up in her arms and fell asleep. He wasn't going to escape so easily, and she really was warm and comfortable. Chapter 1654. And Introvert. Naksha carried her wayward charge back down the stairs for the second time today and wondered what had gotten into the little one. Black dragons were normally not all that curious or exploration-oriented, but this one seemed to have a rebellious spirit and a yearning to explore. Or perhaps it just wanted to fly around and enjoyed the fact that it was somewhere that it was told not to be. Sometimes that sort of reverse psychology worked well on hatchlings, she was told. However, she had never raised any of them before, and she wasn't actually a worker at the orphanage. She had just answered the all-hands-on-deck call when every egg in the space started hatching at once. "What is with the escaping act? Did you have somewhere urgent to be?" she asked the little dragon as it began to wake up. "Nowhere particular. It's just 2 people way down there." The black dragon priestess laughed. "You know, I can understand that feeling. But if you keep escaping somewhere quiet, I have to keep looking for you so that we know you're getting fed and not lost in the space." The little one thought about that. "I suppose that I can stay closer." Naksha smiled at him. "How about this? I will set up a nice tent off to the side with some blankets and a book of death magic runes for you. A quiet spot to retreat to when it gets too loud." The little one nodded. "That sounds nice. Now, where's the food? I swear, I was almost to food before you caught me." Naksha set him down at the end of the table, and the black dragon immediately began sorting meat for its meal. He was an incredibly picky eater and only liked meat from animals that had died in certain ways and states of mind. Anything else didn't smell right. That was another thing that Naksha understood. When she was little, she was the same way. She was also not fond of being around other people, but that feeling was mutual, and they didn't like having her around, even though her magic was always useful to them. It was the struggle of being a servant of the god of death. The rest of the hatchlings in the room were an eclectic mix, thanks to Carl's intervention. Some were shadow dragons, some were earth dragons, even a calamity dragon, a form of fire elemental immortal dragon that normally lived in volcanic regions. They didn't have anything like that in the tiny world, but it had evolved anyhow. It was wonderful to have so many different types of dragons present. They would help bring balance to the tiny world and spread out the elemental affinities of this place. However, they were going to be a real handful to raise. So many kinds of dragons, pure dragons, not subspecies or dragonkin, were going to challenge the staff at every chance. Partially because they were born so powerful, and partially because that was just the nature of young dragons looking to find their place in the social hierarchy. The only group that was actually having trouble with their dragons was the swamp team, and they were blaming that mostly on Remy. The Naga had managed to convince the majority of the dragons that the first thing they needed to do after eating was go for a swim and work off that first meal so they could eat a second one and grow stronger. It made sense in the mind of a hatchling, but in the murky water of the swamp, it was nearly impossible to track all their movements, and many were moving between the water and the air, exploring everything in the area. They couldn't afford to misplace any of the hatchlings, who would all need to eat soon, but they also knew that it was possible some of the larger fish species might actually try to eat them if they wandered too far. Or the hatchlings would try to eat them and would end up getting beat up for their troubles. Especially the swamp dragons, which were a wingless species closer in relation to crocolisks than to actual dragons, with a temper to match. The only saving grace was that they were popular with the beast rangers, and some of those ladies had a second beast slot open. They couldn't bond with actual dragons, their class limitations didn't allow it, but they might be able to bond with the swamp dragons. For the moment, that was their goal. Find the swamp dragon hatchlings and try to get them to imprint on the rangers so that they could convince them to bond as a partner. Compared to the wolves, which were already powerful magical beasts in their own right, the swamp dragons were in a whole other class. How could they not be when they would grow to be a 15-meter-long, 6-legged armored reptile? Remy, oblivious to the chaos that her actions had caused, was devotedly taking notes on the growth of her group compared to the others, using the thoughts and observations of the other beasts to calculate relative growth rates. Hatchlings grew muscle mass at a remarkable rate, so having them exercise and eat multiple times before they fell asleep should put them ahead of their peers by a noticeable amount, she assumed. If her theory was correct, it would revolutionize day one hatchling care. And if it was not correct, then she would just have to convince that old lady who ran the orphanage that her nutritional supplements were safe and effective for hatchlings. That was an uphill battle. The woman seemed inclined to treat her as a hatchling as well, and she didn't take any of Remy's plans to help the growth rate of the baby dragons seriously. Or perhaps she simply didn't want them to grow any faster than they already were. But where was the fun in that? The Carl set all sorts of growth records, and people loved him for it. Surely, if the dragons did the same, it would be even more spectacular. Chapter 1655, Cara's outing plan. While the others fought to keep order among the clutches that they were assigned to, Cara did exactly the opposite. Not deliberately causing chaos, it already existed. Instead, she subtly worked to keep it as the status quo. Sitting in the grasslands with Thor and Tessa, the badger was teaching the young dragons a calisthenics class. They were close to the same size, as dragons were so much larger than badgers when fully grown. But against hatchlings, she was just close enough to show them some basic stretching and mobility techniques. Sister, what are you up to? It is unlike you to be so devoted to teaching, and I know that your species isn't known for their matronly instincts. Thor began. With the Carl around, how could I not learn new things? I swear, I will help your herd grow up big and strong as well. Cara retorted as she twisted and stretched her arms over her head. The hatchlings followed along, mimicking her, while Tessa stared suspiciously at them before realizing what she was doing. Cara was teaching them all how to wiggle out of the most common holding and carrying techniques. But if she made a big deal about it now, the little dragons would realize what they were learning, and they would immediately start to put it into action. After all, it was one of the first things they had learned after entering the world, and they would definitely want to test it out, which would make it nearly impossible for the caretakers to keep them under control. All right, you just keep teaching them, and get those hatchling muscles all limber and strong, Tessa announced instead. that assured the little ones that what they were learning was important, but also distracted them from the fact that it might be abused later. However, she had underestimated the level of chaos that a badger could cause without actively trying to. While she was teaching the hatchlings in her group basic exercises to keep them mobile, they were also memorizing the way that she interacted with others and the casual way that everyone else interacted. To the young dragons, Cara was also a childish figure. They didn't know that was as big as her species got. They just knew that when she was in humanoid form, she looked younger than the others who treated her with respect, as an equal. So, if one child was treated as an equal, why not them? The thought wouldn't leave the minds of the newborn dragons. Everyone else got treated as more responsible, as a person capable of taking care of themselves. And it never entered their minds that size didn't equal age, or that they truly weren't capable of taking care of themselves. In fact, they were the furthest thing from capable of taking care of themselves. Most of them struggled to even remember to chew their food if they weren't given a reminder by the staff. They would grab the bite and immediately try to swallow, desperate to get more food into themselves, and end up nearly choking, despite the bodies of dragons being designed to survive even that level of gluttony. Their breathing and eating were completely separate, not sharing a windpipe as they did with most species. So, they could actually fill themselves to the top of their neck and still breathe. It would just be uncomfortable to try to swallow it all. With their newfound confidence in their bodies after exercising with Cara, the hatchlings began making plans to explore the world. It was not a particularly large world, by any standard, but they had seen none of it except the grass around their nest. They got hungry every time that they woke up from a food coma, and didn't have much time in between that and sleeping again to do anything but Cara's exercises. But after a day and a half, they were ready to stay awake just a little bit longer and stretch their wings. And that was what Cara had been waiting for. She was an excellent flyer, and once she was back in badger form, she would be ready to lead the procession of small flying creatures on their very first adventure. She had even prepared for it. 1 kilometer away, set up on a rocky outcrop closer to the guild house replica, there was a large picnic set up, and that would be their first hunting target. All right, everyone, listen up. We're going on a treasure hunt. If you follow your nose, there will be an amazing prize awaiting you. I will start the trip, pointing you in the right direction, and then you can fly past me and try to be the first to the prize. The first ones there get the first pick of the good stuff, she explained. Tessa was concerned, but she could see that Thor was already laughing at the situation, and he could hear Cara's thoughts. If Thor wasn't concerned, it shouldn't be too big of a deal. Then, Cara transformed, and the hatchlings all took to the sky, following her off into the distance. She's not taking them far, is she? Tessa whispered to the behemoth.
No.
There is a picnic set up for them in the distance. Once they get further into the sky, they will be able to see it. Tessa smiled. You know, as much as she loves causing trouble, she is remarkably reliable. In her own way. Thor agreed. In the sky, the young dragons were darting around Cara and circling as she led them further up. Then, the first of them spotted the picnic, which was set out on a red and white blanket so that it was easily visible from the sky.
Food.
The prize is special food. The first dragon to spot the arrangement cheered. It took the others just a few seconds to find the spot he was aiming at, and then the race was on, every partially developed set of wing muscles straining to get just a bit more speed. The first one to the prize was the first one to choose their snack. Chapter 1656. Picnics and Games. The horde of dragons landed at the picnic blanket in a tangle of wings and claws, all struggling to be the first to get their fill of whatever was on the platters. This was a special meal that Hawk had prepared for them, a favor to Cara, and an expression of his skills as an immortal mystic chef. It often felt like he wasn't as much of a cook as Lotus, who baked the sweets that everyone seemed to love so much, but Hawk was proud of his skills, even if they leaned more towards roasted meats and vegetables than desserts. Healthy eating was important too, even if you were eating mostly for the benefit of the magic that was stored in it. So, the hatchlings had no idea that the meal was actually something special. What they did know was that it was delicious, and that roasted meat was every bit as good as the fresh meat that they had been served before, as it was easier for them to digest. All meat was good meat. But Cara wouldn't have arranged for Hawk to make a meal if there was no potential for additional entertainment. It wasn't in her nature. Just feeding the dragons was something that happened 10 times a day at this point in their lives. So, she had Hawk bring out the good meats, prepared to the best of his abilities to showcase the glory of his cooking skills and the fire element, in her words. That was enough motivation for Hawk. Hey, this one has fruit in the middle. One of the little dragons cheered as he bit into a piece of roasted fish. Fruit in the meat? Is it good? Give me some. Tessa watched the little dragons fight over the chunks of meat as she approached with Thor. They were tiny savages, and Hawk had made dozens of different flavors, without any consideration to how many young dragons were coming. So, while there was more than enough for everyone, there was far from enough of each flavor for everyone to try it all. Exactly as Cara had planned. In some cases, that wasn't such a bad thing. Not every dragon was interested in every flavor. But these were hatchlings, and the urge to compete over food was hardwired into their brains. They couldn't stand the fact that others might have something that they didn't manage to get. It felt like losing. That too was a valuable lesson for the little dragons, but it also meant that there were going to be fights. Not major ones, as the dragons were too young to have activated system classes, and most of them weren't born with control of their innate skills yet. But violent enough that Tessa and Thor had to step in to separate the little ones and keep the battles from spreading to involve others. All right, we will spread the meat out in a larger area if we have to. Everyone play nice and eat whatever smells good. Tessa ordered, using the well-trained mom voice that all red dragon clerics were trained in. It was a tone that worked especially well on Lotus when they were still in the academy, and the young green dragon cleric was about to get herself in trouble again. The hatchlings considered her demand for a few seconds, then quickly realized that spreading out the meat meant it would be further to get to the other flavors. That was not good. They would have to fight even more to get to piles that they couldn't hoard. Thor laughed as the dragons arranged themselves around the blanket and began to jostle and fight for position, which ended up with them making a slow rotation around the meat pile as they all moved from option to option. It almost looked organized. At least, it did until one of them realized that there was an open spot on the top of the pile, and it turned into a starved hatchling version of Capture the Hill. While Tessa tried to organize the chaos of a hatchling picnic, Naksha was having a much easier time with the dragons of the dark and death elements who had naturally congregated around her and Ray. They had moved to a shadowed region of the underground city, which had been entirely appropriated as the orphanage for young dragons in the tiny world. That gave them the comfort and solitude that they wanted, without moving them too far from the others, or making it hard to get to the food. It also mostly stopped the wayward son of the Black Dragon clan from wandering off to go find Carl. Why he was such a draw for the small dragon was a mystery to her. Naksha had clearly heard from her patron on multiple occasions that Carl was prohibited from having a baby dragon. However, that did not mean that baby dragons were not drawn to him. Even Brother Chin, the reborn white dragon, was drawn to him. All right, what does everyone want to do after we eat? Should we play shadow tag? Or should we all have a nap? Naksha asked, knowing what the answer would be and what would actually happen. Shadow tag, the hatchlings demanded as one. That was what she expected as they headed for the end of the second day after the hatching. They would all want to play tag, and then 10 minutes in, they would be exhausted, and the caretakers would be carrying them back to the small beds that had been set up in alcoves for them. But Sister Ray loved to play the game with them, and she would chase them around in spider form, making the hatchlings work their wings to escape her, as the spider put in minimal effort to keep them moving and prevent anyone from actually getting away. It wasn't like they were ever going to be faster than she was, and none of them had a skill that could hide from her eyes. Nor were they likely to learn one in the next few years while they learned the basics of how to be dragons. Chapter 1657. 1 week in. 1 week after all the dragon eggs had hatched, things had finally begun to calm down, and it was becoming clear that their intention to poach a few immortals for the tiny world had been successful. Mark, Nate, and Jim had left the first day after playing with the baby dragons for a bit. But Nyan, Jeff, and Brother Chin remained happily in the space, using the mana gathering arrays to help improve their progression towards the peak of the immortal spirit stage. All of them still had work to do, 2 of them because they had been injured and reborn, and Nyan simply had a terrible advancement rate after she reached immortality. Her system wasn't great, as far as immortal rank was concerned, and she had only recently managed to advance her class with the class change obelisk that Carl had created for the clan. So, she had a lot of work to do. Carl rolled over to look out the window of his room, scanning over the grasslands and the lake area of the tiny world, where hatchling dragons flew in every direction, learning to explore their new surroundings. They were all curiosity now that they could stay awake for more than a few minutes at a time, and they had moved from the demanding food constantly phase to the demanding answers constantly phase of their early development. Naturally, the questions were about anything and everything that a young dragon might be curious about. Why they could fly in air, but not in water. Why the air and the grass were different temperatures. Why lightning dragons didn't taste like forest dragons. That one was almost certainly Cara's fault, Tessa had decided. The badger had definitely licked one of every species of dragon after they hatched, so that she could add it to her mental repository. So the little ones had followed her lead, taste testing everything. In some ways, it was helpful to their development. They needed to learn the things that they liked and did not like. But having them constantly testing things that should not be eaten was beginning to stress out the handlers. Carl laughed at the antics of the little ones outside, and then wrapped his arms around Dana, who was still sleeping soundly beside him. Rustling in the rafters drew his attention, and Carl looked up to see Opal sleeping on a hammock, with what looked like a painter's easel set up on the rafter beside her. Was she planning to make a painting of something that she saw last night? Well, the joke was on her. By the time that they had returned to their room, both of them had been so exhausted that they hadn't done anything but sleep. Even now, they were still in their most comfortable pajamas. Carl cast his mind out over the space, looking for any signs of trouble, and found that almost everything was under control. The only current issues were that the forest dragons in the tree fort were reluctant to get up for breakfast, too comfortable to let hunger rule them this early, and that one female divine lightning dragon hatchling had managed to sneak into Nyan's bed so that she could nap next to Jeff. She refused to believe that he was not one of the other hatchlings, and had decided that not only was he of her species, but he should be the most promising of all of them. So, she was determined that she must remain in his presence to learn his secrets. However, Nyan had no intention of letting someone else steal her Jeff, so that had turned into her sharing a bed with 2 small dragons. She had explained many times that Jeff was older and that he was injured, which caused him to regress to a smaller size, but the little dragon hadn't ever heard of anything like that before and simply assumed that she was lying to keep the prodigy all to herself. The fact that Nyan was overly protective of Jeff was not helping her case. And then there was the case of the escaping black dragon. As the ultimate introvert and an adherent of the god of death, he saw no particular reason to be near the other hatchlings unless there was a lesson being taught, and routinely wandered off to follow someone who was doing interesting things. Not to accompany them or interact with them. No, he just wanted to fly or waddle along after them to see what they were doing. The kitchen staff were his most common targets, as they smelled like blood most of the time, as they were constantly preparing fresh meat. However, he was also a fan of trying to find Ray and figure out what she was up to, or following Thor to the training ground, where he would watch the behemoth practice his combat skills. This morning, he had not gone far, and he was in the complex under the mountain, watching the kitchen staff butcher chickens for the morning meal. "Hey, what are those flat things?" he asked. "Tortillas for the breakfast burritos. I don't know if your stomach can handle that yet. They smell good, like ash and fire." "Crap, I burnt one." "Well, how about I scrape the burnt part off and you can try it?" the chef suggested. The little dragon nodded. "That should be good. It's definitely dead now. Very burnt." The cook wasn't sure if she should laugh or cry at being commended for burning a tortilla she was supposed to be warming. But she scraped the char off and gave the little dragon a bite. "It's chewy, but not meat chewy. Tastes like not meat and a bit of fire. I approve. Do you put the chicken in there?" "Chicken would be good with this." "Yes, the chicken or sausage and some potato and egg and hot sauce." "Hot sauce? You made fire into a sauce? I must have this." The chef laughed and cut one of the burritos into halves. Here, try some, but don't blame me if you get a sore tummy. The black dragon picked the piece of breakfast burrito up with both front claws and bit down on it. Fire. Oh, this is bliss. Yes, we must have more of these. And meat. More meat. Is the meat ready? The elf just sighed in dismay. Making piles of raw meat for the hatchlings was so much easier than cooking proper meals for 100 more mouths was going to be. Yes, we have plenty of meat ready. But you know the rule, you have to wait until breakfast is served before you get any. You only got a bite of burrito early, because you never tried it before. That's a dumb rule. There is meat, I can smell it. Once you're grown enough that you can make your own breakfast, you can negotiate changes to the rules with a matron. Then it's never changing. That dragon is scary. Chapter 1658. Taking the little one on a walk. Carl crept out of bed and had a quick shower before dressing for the day. After hiding away for a week, it was time to head out of the tiny world and go check on the outside world again. The only ones that had been outside lately were Leo and Cara, who were going to school. They hadn't reported anything odd, but that didn't mean that there was nothing going on, only that it wasn't being reported to the children. Even Cara wasn't focused on what was happening outside when she spent her free time either learning fun things with her class or playing games with the baby dragons. There were quite a few who were clearly going to be immortal born, destined to advance without tribulation the moment that they activated their system interface. So, as she didn't know whether they would be keeping those ones or working to transfer them to the immortal world for assistance, she wanted to get in all the quality time that she could. The little ones had wonderfully chaotic ideas. They couldn't help it, they had no frame of reference for the world, so they simply blurted out whatever came to mind first, and Cara did her best to make it a possibility. Her mission for today was to help one of the young ones escape for a few minutes. Not escape detection. The little one was certain that there was a whole other world out there, one that was hidden from what the dragon viewed as the starting area of the universe, the tiny world which was a third baby dragon's at this point. If that was not a protected starting area for them, what else could it be? The voice in her head told her that there were many other worlds, and she just had to find them before she was fully grown so that she could awaken her full potential. The little dragon didn't know what that meant, but she fully intended to find out. Cara transformed and crept up to her while nobody else was watching, then took her out of the tiny world, exiting into Carl's apartment. All right, we have to make this quick before we get caught and get in trouble. This is the immortal world, or one of the immortal worlds anyhow. This is where you will move after you have grown enough in the tiny world that there are no more challenges there. This is a safe spot in the world called the New Home Merchant Clan. However, the rest of the world is very dangerous, even for immortal dragons. Many people will want to steal your powers or chop you up and steal your scales after you are outside the clan. Inside, it is fairly safe, so I will take you to a special place that all young dragons must know. Cara whispered for dramatic effect. There was nobody in the apartment to hear them. The library? The little dragon asked hopefully. Cara laughed. Not this time, though that one is very important as well. We will come back to that one once you have activated the system and gained your first class. Today, we will go to the supply warehouse to meet my friend Min. The Carl has placed an order for few items there, so we will pick them up and bring them back. But that will let you meet Miss Min, and she will take care of your exchanges for supplies in the future. The little dragon nodded solemnly. This Min person must be extremely important if Cara was going to bring her to the supply warehouse first. The two left the apartment, the tiny dragon waddling along beside Cara's human form, in the awkward way of toddlers of every species. But what she lacked in agility on the ground, she made up for in adorableness, and everyone they passed was careful not to disturb or step on the tiny creature, who was clearly doing her best to sneak out of the house with Cara. Most of the clan knew already that Cara was a chaos badger, so they were not surprised that she was helping a baby dragon escape home. But they also knew that her species thrived on the reactions of others, and if they made a big production out of catching her at it, they would only encourage her to do it more often. What they didn't realize was that Cara had planned for this, and their reactions were helping teach the young divine lightning dragon to be comfortable around strangers. Not too comfortable, she had been warned that the world was dangerous. But comfortable enough that she wouldn't become a shut-in, which Cara viewed as a real danger for all things blue. Blue dragons and their libraries, Remy and her alchemy laboratory. It was basically the same thing, blue creatures shutting themselves away from the world so that they could immerse themselves in whatever they were working on. Even Jeff, the regressed divine lightning dragon, hid himself away. That was to help rebuild his immortal spirit, which required thousands of hours of focus to gather energy using the technique that he knew. But to Cara, that was irrelevant. He was blue, and he hid indoors, what made him less entertaining. The door chimed as they entered, and Min looked up from her counter. "Ah, Cara. It's good to see you again. What brings you out here this morning?" Cara placed a strength ring from Carl's recent production efforts on the counter. "I came to pay for and pick up the plants that we ordered," she explained proudly, while the little dragon stared up in awe. That was when Min noticed that they were not alone, and excitedly leapt over the counter to scoop up the little one in her arms. "Oh, goddess, she's adorable. What is your name, little one?" The green dragon gushed. "I am Tenna. You must be the legendary Min, keeper of the loot warehouse." Min giggled. It was definitely Cara who had described her that way to this tiny blue ball of scales. "Indeed I am. But I am not yet legendary. I'm still fairly young. I am also a green dragon, but it's more convenient for me to transform for work. You'll learn that trick one day when you're a bit older." The dragon nodded excitedly, wiggling in Min's arms. The dragon known as Button is only a little older than I am, and she already knows the trick to turning into a human. It looks very handy. But they told me that until I grow up a little there is no point, because my human form would be too young to be useful. I bet that the Carl has a better way to do it, but he said that he's not going to teach us yet. Something about gaining skills too early would mess up our class progression. Min laughed. Carl is very right. If you get a skill before you get a class, it will limit the options for classes to ones that are related to the skill that you already know. If you don't have any good options for classes, that can be a powerful way to get a new option, but that's after you already have a class and you've learned all it can teach you. Tenna made a mental note. Classes had limits. You were meant to learn everything from them, and then find a way to get a better one to learn even more cool things. Chapter 1659. Tenna learns Brain Freeze. Min returned behind the counter with Tenna still in her arms, and collected the items that Carl had requested. That was an enlightening experience for the little dragon. There were so many cool things hidden behind that wall in what they called a warehouse, and all you needed was to have something suitably shiny to trade for them. These Immortal World dragons really did have a good system, trading loot from their horde for new loot from the group horde. They must have learned it from Sister Cara. In the mind of the hatchling, Cara was the greatest source of loot-related wisdom, and even now she had managed to trade just one shiny thing for a whole stack of fragrant plants to grow in the tiny world. Who else could manage such a lopsided deal? Of course, Tenna had no way of knowing that a rare-grade immortal rank ring was incredibly valuable. All that she knew was that it was one small piece of shiny loot. "Well, if you've got all that you need, I'm about to go on break and return to my room," Min began. "Not without me. You can cuddle the baby dragon, but I promised the red dragon matriarch that I would bring her back." Min shuddered in instinctive fear of the wrath of the orphanage matrons. "Good point. We will all go for ice cream, and then I will return to work, while you bring the little one back." "Miss Tenna, have you had a chance to experience ice cream yet?" "Ice cream? Frozen cream? I don't know that thing. Is it good?" "The Dana mage likes cream in her coffee." Min laughed at the hatchling's rapid-fire questions. "Yes, it is amazing. Cream is good for so many things, both hot in coffee and frozen in ice cream. You can even make fluffy whipped cream with it." "Oh, I know that one. Our green dragon makes snacks with that." Min smiled. She knew that Carl had much more hidden in the tiny world than she had gotten time to explore, but she hadn't thought that there would be a divine lightning dragon hatchling. Was that his next plan for power? To bond a hatchling that was born for immortality? Min waved over one of the other staff members, who gave her an amused look, already knowing that she was taking an extra break to spend more time with the hatchling. She would have to work overtime to make up for it, but making her stay would make her miserable, and by extension, everyone around her would be miserable as well. "Bring me back one of their egg sandwiches," she called as Min rushed out the door. At the very least, she could get a snack out of covering for her clearly distracted coworker. Min waved in acceptance as she rushed out with the hatchling divine lightning dragon in her arms, only for the elder passing by to immediately burst into laughter. Is this some sort of fashion trend now? Running around with a divine lightning dragon in your arms? First it was Nyan, and now it's Min. But it's not the same dragon.
He joked.
Min giggled. Elder, meet Tenna. Tiny Tenna is a freshly hatched divine lightning dragon, not a reborn one like Jeff. We're going to go introduce her to the joys of ice cream. And where did you find this lovely young lady?
He asked.
Cara brought her to me. Would you like to join us? The warehouse elder considered it for a moment, then shook his head. No, if the mother of this child comes looking for her, I would rather not be present and face her accusations. Tenna laughed and fluttered her one free wing. It's fine. I live with the red dragons, and the matron doesn't know that we went on an adventure to go collect the Carl's order from the warehouse. In that case, I definitely don't want to be present. The matrons are scary, he joked. If the matrons had allowed Cara to take her out, it must be fine. But he had work to do. Tenna nodded in agreement. The matron got all growly when you didn't listen. But she still wanted to know what ice cream was all about. Cara would keep her safe. The ice cream shop was quiet when they entered, with only a few tables occupied and nobody in line. As such, it was impossible to miss the fact that Min had brought in a small child in the middle of the morning when she was normally on shift. Greetings, what can we get for you today? The clerk asked as Tenna struggled to get free of Min's arms and examine the ice cream selection. This all smells amazing. It's sweet and creamy, and I smell fruits and nuts. Definitely food, but not a meal. How wonderful is that? If there's no meat, it doesn't count as dinner, so it doesn't count as eating early. Her declaration made the clerk giggle. That was definitely one way of looking at it. Is there a flavor that you like best? The clerk asked carefully, ready to intervene if the little dragon tried to get off the top of the display and into the freezer. It wouldn't be the first time. Tingly. I like the tingles, they taste like lightning. She means mint, or anything else you have that has that cool and tingly mouth feeling. Cara clarified. In that case, we've got a mountain dragonberry and chocolate special edition that you will absolutely love. Here, try a sample. She scooped a tiny bit onto a wooden sample spoon and held it out for Tenna. The little dragon grabbed it in both front claws and greedily began licking every trace of ice cream off the spoon, which she then ate. The spoon isn't part of the snack. It's not bad, though. I think it's Highland Grove bamboo. The forest dragons recommended it for edible bowls. The clerk sighed. You're going to need to talk to your dragons. Forest dragons might be fine with it, but most species are not well built to digest bamboo. Cara gave her a double thumbs up. I will keep that in mind. Get Miss Tenna a bowl of that, and I will have the rocky road. I think that Min wants the peach sorbet today. Min blinked. That was an option? She didn't see it anywhere in the case. But the clerk smiled and went into the back to bring out a fresh bucket of ice cream. I don't know how you knew that we had received it. It only came in last night and we were keeping it secret. It's the special flavor starting tomorrow. But for Min, we can make an exception. The warehouse clerk cheered at being the first one to get to buy their special of the month. That was a big moment for Green Dragon. Chapter 1660. Pace yourself. With their treasures in hand, the three of them took a seat in the back of the store, enjoying the silence as Tenna learned all about new flavors and the dangers of brain freeze. Having never eaten anything that was so cold before, she had no warning when it first hit, and her paws flew to her head as she moaned in agony. It was delicious, but dangerous. Ice cream was a chaos element food. You need to eat it slowly. Ice cream teaches young dragons patience. Min explained. Tenna frowned at her bowl. Can't you just eat it all at once and only get one brain freeze? But then you only get to enjoy the taste one time instead of lots of times. The little dragon's eyes went wide. That was a life-altering bit of wisdom, and the green dragon shared it so freely. She really was a good person. Tenna carefully licked more of the ice cream and let it melt a little on her tongue before closing her mouth. This method was better, but a little messy. She would retract her tongue next time, but not close her mouth immediately, to avoid brain freeze. Then she saw how Cara did it. She turned the spoon and held it in her mouth for a moment so that it protected the top of her mouth from the cold, and that seemed to work. So that was how Tenna decided to do it as well. Min smiled as she realized that not only was the little one learning about ice cream, she was learning about utensils as well. Baby dragons couldn't transform, as their human form would be helpless. But in that state, they normally only ate various forms of meat and things that were already cut up so they could just bite into them. If they were feral, they would eat meat straight from the body of their prey. But even Carl wouldn't have the little ones hunting so soon, she assumed. That was accurate, but not entirely true. They were teaching the little ones hunting games within the tiny world. But not against live animals, just as games, with food as the prizes. The young dragons needed to have their instincts rewarded so that they didn't get bored or confused, and that was one of the best ways to do it. Every dragon hunted, and they all did it in their own way, building on the skills that their species was born with. But today, not all of them would have to hunt alone. While Cara had stolen one dragon for an adventure, the Beast Rangers were preparing their final round of bribes to try to convince the swamp dragons that becoming a bonded partner was the best option. They were among the strongest beasts that the Rangers could bond, nearly as strong as the actual dragons around them, and wickedly intelligent for a non-sapient species. They were smarter than hounds or even cats, but not quite at the level of something like a chaos badger or demonic spider that could speak common languages or understand complex relationships. However, that would quickly change if they were bonded to the Rangers. Just like what had happened with Hawk and the others, the bond would increase their intelligence, and they would be the most incredible partners that the Rangers could hope for. The increase might not be on the same level as what Carl's beasts saw. The increase that the normal beasts got from Rangers was far smaller. But their bonded partners were definitely smarter than usual, and there were some known cases of Rangers who bonded dolphins and certain ape species having a companion that could speak. Oddly, the dolphins learned to speak Elvish, not an aquatic language, according to the records that Carl had found while researching the subject. That seemed odd, but the cases where there was an advanced ranger class who bonded a dolphin were sailors, fishermen in particular. So it might have just been that they were speaking Elvish, and that was naturally the language that the dolphins learned from them. There wasn't enough detail in the books to be clear, except for the fact that they had learned to speak out loud, not just in the minds of their bonded partners. Carl mentally checked on Cara, to be sure that she hadn't forgotten that she brought one of the hatchlings on an adventure, and then Shadow stepped over to join the Rangers at the swamp for their attempts to bond their new partners. The swamp dragons were more plentiful than the Beast Rangers who could bond them, so there would be no competition in that direction. However, there was some concern that the hatchlings might see it as a competition and begin fighting each other. That would be disastrous for their little social experiment. So Carl intended to join them to prevent things from getting out of hand. The hatchlings gathered around him as Carl arrived. He was the one who trained Big Sister Remy, so he was practically an uncle to them. His words were important. "Good morning, everyone. We have these lovely ladies here, both lizard folk and demon, who would like to join with you as partners, the same way that Remy and the others are bonded to me. Now, they're not quite as cool as I am, but they will treat you very well and help you grow big and strong." Carl began. The Rangers rolled their eyes at Carl's blatant provocation, but didn't say anything, as he wasn't wrong. Not only was he more powerful, but his class was infinitely cooler than theirs by nearly every metric. Even the regular wind-speed hawk that he had taken and had turned into a dark flame phoenix, while their first beasts had not evolved at all since bonding. Not that the dire wolves needed much. "Does anyone have any questions?"
Carl asked.
All the swamp dragons began growling and snapping as Carl listened carefully, and the Rangers struggled to make any sense of them. The Beast Rangers did get a skill to help them understand animals, but with dozens of them speaking at the same time, it was nearly impossible to get details beyond body language and an occasional insight.
All right.
Those who want to keep playing in the swamp can move to the back. Those who think that demons smell funny can move to the middle, and those who want to see how helpful a ranger is in making them stronger can come to the front to meet your potential partners. The demons huffed in annoyance, then smiled at the swamp dragons. They were not a native species to the swamp, so of course they smelled funny to the hatchlings.